Welcome everyone to today's SOARCE webinar, Sharing Ocean Acidification Resources for Communicators and Educators. The purpose of the SOARCE webinar is to provide education and outreach resources to the education and communications communities and anyone else interested in joining our group. Today our webinar is entitled Ocean Protector, an online ocean acidification game, presented to us by Alex Zimmerman. Everyone is going to be in listen-only mode. However, if you would like to provide comments or questions, please use the questions box that you'll see on the right-hand side of your panel. You can also leave us comments there as well, and we'll put any links that are in reference in the presentation today into the chat for you, and you will receive a recording with closed captioning at the end of this webinar. So I'm Liz Parati. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Ocean Acidification Program. This webinar series is provided to you by the Ocean Acidification Program and National Marine Sanctuaries, and two other people who are instrumental in providing this webinar series are Claire Feckler of the National Marine Sanctuary Office and Natalie Lord, our Knaus Fellow with the Ocean Acidification Program. As I mentioned, you can use the questions box for any questions or comments. And this is Alex. I'd like to introduce you to him. He is at the University of Indiana as a visiting scholar. And he comes to us from as a marine educator and researcher. He has a passion for making science engaging to a wide audience. And over his academic and early professional career, he has worked in a variety of roles, including teaching science courses, mentoring student researchers, leading outreach events and science camps, and publishing research on ancient and modern marine fauna. Like I said, Alex is currently a visiting researcher at Indiana University, and he is the developer of outreach games, one of which he's going to describe to you today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Alex to present, and you'll have an opportunity to have a little chat and discussion with him at the end of this. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. All right, so hi everyone, I'm Alex Zimmerman, and very happy to be here talking about the ocean acidification educational game I developed for the Ocean Acidification Program at NOAA, part of a mini grant program. And the title of that game, like I mentioned, is Ocean Protector. And throughout this presentation, I'm going to be talking about the design, development, lessons learned, and all of that kind of thing. So thank you all for being here. But first, before talking about the presentation in depth, I wanted to say a big thank you to all the collaborators and acknowledge the NOAA Ocean Acidification Program for their funding for this project. So this project would not be possible without all the collaborators that I've worked with throughout the past year and a half now. That includes Claudia Johnson from Indiana University, outreach coordinators from the Indiana Geological and Water Survey, and many educators from Indiana middle schools. And of course, the funding from NOAA's Ocean Acidification Program mini grant. So thank you to all of those folks. This would not be possible without this big group effort. So the outline of today's talk, I'm going to start talking about why did I choose originally to do an ocean acidification game, specifically an online game. Then I'll talk about the objectives and goals to make the game and talk about the game development itself, so working with educators, iterative feedback, and how this entire design process went. Then I'm going to dive into the learning framework of the game. So taking the students through this base knowledge level all the way up to synthesis and evaluation. Then I'm going to give some specific examples and screenshots from the students' perspective as they play the game, so through their game experience, what it might look like. And then I'm also going to talk about the educator resources that we developed for this grant. So those include things like lesson plans, module integration examples, and how this game aligns to specific national science standards. Then I'll talk about how we distributed the game and its use thus far, and then talk about some ongoing work, updates, and future plans. And I'd be also happy to answer questions. And again, thank you all for being here and taking the time out of your day to join this presentation. So to start off, why an ocean acidification game? Well, as we know in this presentation and all of us who joined here, ocean acidification is an increasing threat to marine health globally, along with many areas locally. And one of NOAA's goals is to expand educational content that is accessible. And when I first started this project, I was looking at NOAA's ocean acidification program implementation plan, and it specifically mentioned targeting new educational content that had and showed impacts on ocean life and positive actions that we can all take to help reduce those impacts on ocean life. And just as a little reminder here, I took these screenshots from the NOAA Ocean Acidification Program model database online with the link there. But this is just showing again how pH has changed from post-industrial revolution to projections into the future century. So going from 8.2 to 7.8, which is a very large modeled decrease. So it's a threat that we all know about, but we want to help spread that awareness. And through my background, I've always been looking and trying to expand how I was communicating science, especially to large groups of people, and making something that's digital can really make it accessible. And personally, I have a background in doing game development as a hobby, so I was really lucky I could merge these two interests into this project. And I was also very happy that NOAA agreed to fund this project as well. So again, more details about game-based learning in particular. So games can foster self-directed learning because students can actively interpret and make decisions in the game and then see the outcomes of their own decisions in the game in real time. Then the game can also give them iterative feedback and say, oh, maybe you could do this better, or maybe this could be changed, or you did this really well. Now let's make a new decision with that knowledge that you've just integrated. So students can actively assess and interpret ocean acidification outcomes specifically from their own decisions within the game. And ultimately, that's what motivated and fueled the decision to make this ocean acidification game called Ocean Protector. And again, thanks to NOAA's funding, this is a free open source online ocean acidification game that is accessible to anyone with an internet connection. So the specific project objectives when we were going through this entire process of designing the game, first we wanted to design the game with a framework of decisions and outcomes of ocean acidification actions and effects. So what are some choices a student can see that would be something that they could take with them in their own life and see effects in the real game. So within this game design development, we wanted to incorporate ocean acidification science and literature and publishing research articles from NOAA, while at the same time aligning it to national science standards. And we wanted to develop an engaging game program. So we wanted to continually talk with educators and test and refine throughout our entire development process to make sure that this was easy for educators to use and also enjoyable for students. And at the same time we were making this game, we wanted to make it as easy for educators to deploy and use just out of the box as possible. So that included, like I mentioned, creating educator supplementary documents. And our final project objective was to release this game freely with live demos and sustained maintenance. So part of a broader goal of this project was helping contribute interactive ocean acidification multimedia tools, which was one of the highlight points in the ocean acidification program's implementation plan. Also, game-based curriculum was also in that document as well. So this game helps provide additional optimized content for meeting that goal. And ultimately, especially with an online game that anyone across the country could access if they have internet, ideally this will help expand ocean literacy and thinking about how we can all affect the oceans, especially with students from inland communities who might not have that knowledge otherwise. So as I mentioned, this game would, and this entire development really, would not be possible without the really rich and awesome collaboration from many different people. So throughout this process, we follow this kind of feedback model of coming up with an idea and then discussing it with educators, and then seeing how they reacted to that, what their feedback was, updating our designs, and then having educators again look at what we had updated our designs with. So we worked with outreach coordinators, like I mentioned, at the Indiana Geological and Water Survey, and multiple middle school educators, including about 8 frequent collaborators from middle schools within Indiana. So we would talk and prototype and refine in this iterative process throughout all of those design steps I mentioned, all the way from making that framework of designs and decisions to seeing how the game and user interface worked, all the way to how was it easiest to deploy and how can we optimize the program itself so it runs on things like Chromebooks and can run on a variety of computers and even phones potentially. So throughout this entire design process, collaboration has been vital. And as I mentioned, one of the big things we wanted to focus on was ease of use for both students and educators. So for students, we wanted students to be able to just go to the website and click run. That's all they would have to do. They wouldn't have to download anything. They wouldn't have to get things set up. They could just go to the website and click play. Also within the game, we wanted to scaffold guidance for students, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But in a broad sense, that was bringing them in with and showing them in the game base knowledge about the oceans and large marine life groups in the ocean, and then slowly building up throughout the game to build their knowledge and understanding, and then introduce them to topics of ocean acidification, and then allow them to kind of further and build and scaffold on their learning about decisions they can make and how these outcomes and their decisions affect the marine life. And throughout this entire process, of course, you need to have a really clear user interface, because especially with content that's new for students, it has to be really clear and easy to understand, and it also has to look nice, especially if it's a game. So we wanted to make sure students had that learning experience that was also really easy to use and to understand. Regarding educator materials, like I mentioned, we iteratively worked with educators to design lesson plans. So this entire game comes with these supplementary materials on the website. So there's a lesson plan that has objectives and background information and how students will go through the game and ideas to talk about with post discussions and extra links and things like that. We also, within those educating materials, show specific national science standards and how they align, and give an example of module integration. And finally, one of the big things educators were really asking for, and we were happy to deliver on, was a quantitative way for teachers based on WeMade and the final score percent, or how long students spent on each question, what choice they chose, all of those kinds of things. So it's totally anonymous, but it allows educators to see specifically what quantitative data their class might be doing. And you might be thinking, well, if it's anonymous, how do they get that data? Well, at the beginning of the game, the students type in a 4-digit number that the educator can tell them to type in. So they can search for those numbers and get the information that way. And you can also see the date to further sort and refine information. So ultimately, as we talk with educators,
Alex, you're cutting in and out. Maybe you could turn off your camera so that it'll give you a better connection. Sure. Thank you.
Sounds good. All right, so hopefully that helps. And with this collaboration, awesome. With this collaboration, another thing that educators really wanted to bring up was that they wanted this to be a little bit flexible for time in the classroom. So at the core of this game, we designed it for a single 50-minute class period, but there's options to expand it across 2 to 3 periods. So within the game itself, there's an autosave and resume feature. So if you close or lose a connection, you can just open up the browser again and it'll resume wherever you last left off. So you could come back the next day in your class and it'll automatically resume where you left off. Also, educators can use materials from the lessons plan for pre or post content. So they can talk more about ocean chemistry if they want to, or afterwards they can have larger group discussions or additional homework assignments to expand and make this entire lesson as flexible as they might want. Also, they can have students go through and choose different decisions throughout the game to see how things change. So there's a little bit of flexibility involved there. And ultimately, with this grant, the core developed audience was for students grades 6 through 8, but we have had educators say, well, I'm likely also going to use this in higher grades, especially in like lower high school level grades. So they were going to incorporate some additional NOAA content, some additional data, and talk a little bit about the ocean chemistry in more detail as well, for example. So at its core, it's designed for a single class period in middle school, but it can easily be expanded and remains flexible for educators to use in additional ways as they see fit. And another aspect of the collaboration that educators were really excited about was bringing in more resources that NOAA has made and made available. So NOAA has these great resources on fisheries and species and lots of different marine topics for educators. So we wanted to link those into the game as well. And if there's specific species in the game, we wanted those to relate back to real world species as well. So NOAA has a great site, NOAA Fisheries, that we took inspiration from for creating game adaptations of real world species in. And within the game, there's a link that students can click on that shows which species are linked to the real world links on NOAA Fisheries site. So students can go in and see what the geographic range are, what some biological facts are, what the fishing status is for certain groups of animals as well. So we give that springboard for more additional content, especially for students who might want to read about that, or educators who might want to make that or incorporate that into their lesson plans. And ultimately, we wanted to make the game replayable to reinforce learning as well. And finally, with our collaboration, one of the things the educators really were excited about was adding quantitative aspects for the students as well. So a big push in science in general has been to focus on analyzing real world or quantitative data. So within the game, we added that aspect. So throughout the game, students will collect data on all of the different marine life groups at each time step that they're making decisions. And throughout the entire process, they gather more and more time series data. And at the very end of the game, they have a nice example plot like we see here, where they can see how various health levels of different marine groups have changed through time. And they can think about how the start versus the end and what their decisions were and how that all ties together. And also, as I mentioned, one of our goals here was to focus and provide resources for inland communities as well. So the vast majority of these decisions in the game also apply to inland communities. So they're not just decisions that you'd only face if you lived on the coast, they're also decisions that anybody across the country or beyond could think about and incorporate into their own lives. Because ultimately our goal here is to educate, but also help show positive actions that we can all take to both help marine health and help reduce ocean acidification. So throughout this game development process, we had this really valuable collaboration, and we also wanted to avoid some common pitfalls of making an educational video game. So commonly, you might be thinking, oh, I've seen some educational video games. They might have some issues, right? They might be all game and no education, or they might be all education and no game. So we wanted to find a really nice balance between all of those. So first, we wanted to maximize the interactive nature of the game. So students can explore the scene, they can click on each animal to see what it is and measure it throughout the entire game. And they also have a variety of things to do. They're answering questions, they're observing how things are changing, they're measuring data, they're looking at their data plots. And all of this is happening with real-time impacts within the game. So students can make a decision and directly see what's happening. Also, a common thing that some people who play games like to do is go through the game really fast just by clicking everything in a row and not actually absorbing anything. So we wanted to minimize this thing called speed running. So to do that, we broke up the various tasks of the game. So for example, rather than just making a bunch of decisions in a row where students can just click through that really fast, each decision is its own little block of action. So students will make a decision, then they'll view what happens, then they'll measure data for all of the marine groups, and then they'll read some summaries and recommendations and have time to reflect on what the decision was and what the outcome was. Then after all of that, then they'll finally move on to the next decision. So we minimize this speed running aspect. They can't just have their mouse in one spot and click really fast to go through everything. It doesn't work like that. Also, Chromebooks are a massive part of education now, and they're not the fastest computers. So we wanted to make sure this game was maximized for performance. So it could run on Chromebooks. It had fast web loading compared to many other games. And we want to make sure that educators can use it with a variety of internet connections. Also, we want to make sure this was student driven, that students were making decisions in the game where they could figure out and view based off their own choices in the game what's happening. Also, they're collecting the data themselves. They're clicking on each marine group to add that data to their data log. They're driving this process throughout the game. So we wanted to make it very learner-driven focused. Also, since it's a game, we have this really great opportunity to leverage visualizations. So we wanted to make some modern-looking graphics and animations and a clean user interface. So something that was aesthetically nice to look at, was still very well optimized, hence the two-dimensional nature, but still looked nice and ran well. Also, at the core of this, we always wanted to ensure the educational content. So we wanted to combine the content and the gameplay in a way that balanced that it was fun and interactive for students to use, but always basing things on the ocean acidification science and the positive actions that students could take away from this and do in their own lives that could help real world, in a real world sense, reduce ocean acidification. And we also wanted to, like I mentioned, scaffold students' learning throughout this entire process. So beginning with knowledge and then building throughout the game all the way to higher levels of learning like synthesis and application and evaluation. So this collaborative process, we gleaned lots of great information from this, and with that knowledge and iterative feedback, we were fortunately able to address lots of these common game pitfalls. So that's kind of the almost the theoretical and qualitative side of things, but within the nitty-gritty programming aspects, what did we use? Well, we wanted to focus on using things like robust and well-maintained software. So we wanted programs and websites and things like that that have been around a long time, they're well tested, and favorably, they're either open source or they're low and no cost. So to actually develop the game, we used a game engine called Default, which is one of the best free and open source game engines for developing web-optimized two-dimensional games. And to actually make and draw the sprites and the fish and the little images and things like that, we used Inkscape, which is an open source version of Adobe Illustrator. Or you can think of it as an open source version of Adobe Illustrator. To actually host the code of the game along with the game website, we use GitHub and GitHub Pages. So this is an open source project. You're welcome to go see the code yourself. And everything's open source and freely available thanks to NOAA. The actual website link that you can go to is hosted by GitHub Pages as well. So that's the public facing side that most people will see. Also, to have the quantitative feedback and analytics, we use Google Sheets because that's free and educators know how to use it. And then to host downloadable versions of the game, we use the popular game hosting platform Steam. So most educators like the browser-based version because they can just go there and click run and they don't have to download anything. But for folks who do want to download it or might want to just discover it in their own way, the game is hosted on Steam as well. Again, totally for free. And if you're an educator interested in making little short game-based learning modules for your own classroom, I think that's absolutely fantastic. And again, I'd be happy at any point to answer questions about that. Feel free to email me or ask questions later. But if you are interested in that kind of thing, there's some really great no coding options available for really simple games that you can visually move things around in and program things in. You don't need lots of programming knowledge. And one of the big ones is G develop, the letter G and then the word develop. That's a really nice one for no coding educators to make simple games with. All right, so I've talked a little bit about this learning framework, but we took all of this collaboration and ideas and built it into this framework that the students will go through. So at the foundation of all of this is NOAA data and models and alignment to science standards. And building on that foundation, we have this student framework that they'll go through. So first, students will be shown this establishment knowledge and information about marine life and ocean acidification. And then once they have that established knowledge, they'll choose a character with individual goals. And that character kind of sets them off on their path. So once they choose a character, they're presented with a series of decisions that have various choices. So they'll make decisions about their character, they'll make decisions about recommending things to the community, and this entire process is kind of the core gameplay loop. So students will see a decision and some choices, think about what the best option is and make that choice. And then they'll view the outcome in real time throughout the game. So they'll be shown the visualization of how that's affected the ocean scene they're looking at. They'll see how it's affected their character. Then they'll measure how it's affecting various ocean life groups. And then they'll get some adaptive recommendations on what they did well, what they could do well in the future, and see the summary of all of their impacts of that decision on ocean acidification. Then they'll go to another decision that's at a slightly higher level of learning and understanding and do the exact same thing, talking about choosing a good choice based off their current knowledge and understanding, and go through this process again of seeing how that choice affects marine life and ocean acidification and their character's progress. So after they do this really useful iterative loop, at the very end of the game, they'll be presented with some final summary analyses that they can look at and examine and discuss. So they can see things like ocean acidification impact results at the end of all of their decisions, the cumulative effect. They can see the summary of actions that they took and get some adaptive recommendations. They'll also have the opportunity to replay the game or go to NOAA's sites to get lots more additional information. So let's look at some screenshots now to see that from the student perspective. We've kind of been talking about it from the educator perspective. Let's see that from the student perspective. So if the students just go to the website and they click play, they'll be presented with a scene that looks similar to this, with a nice ocean scene here centered in species that are found in US waters. There you can see there's some corals here, there's some various fish, along with the plankton. Little zoom in window right here, there's some oysters and snails and crabs and shrimp and things like that. So the game begins with having students just look at the scene and start exploring the scene and seeing what major groups of life are here. And again, all of these are real world species that are present in the Gulf of Mexico or the Southeast US. So students will start to gain this base knowledge and start to then be presented with information about ocean acidification. So there'll be some infographics, there'll be more exploration of the scene, there'll be some text information, and the game itself reveals how ocean acidification can affect ocean life. So there will be various multimedia components coming together to show the students that. And once students have gone through this introductory material and gained this baseline knowledge, then they'll be presented with a short little in-game quiz. And this is just a really basic review quiz to see what their current understanding is, and they can repeat this as many times as they need to get to the next level. But there's also a little review sheet that they can open up in a different tab that summarizes all of this foundational knowledge they got. So that's a PDF that students can look at in a different tab if they want to. So once they've completed their foundational knowledge with the in-game quiz, then they can move on and choose a character with specific goals. And those characters include things like a marine park ranger, a fishing boat captain, or an ocean tour guide. And once they've chosen a character, then they'll start making decisions as that character. Their ultimate goal being here is to help their character's success, but also help the success of the ocean life in general, and ideally make sure to minimize the effects of ocean acidification. So for example, they might be presented with decisions about how to use their boat, or as they think about what might be good for the community and what might be good for the ocean, they'll be presented with this variety of decisions like this. And they can apply their knowledge to choosing decisions. They'll be shown various choices that some might have positive benefits that help reduce ocean acidification and help improve the life of the ocean. Some options might not really do anything. They might be an option that's something they can do, but it might not be helpful in the long run for reducing ocean acidification. And some options just might be not very good overall and might actually cause more ocean acidification. So as I mentioned, they'll make a decision, then they'll analyze how their decision affects ocean life in real time. So if it was a good decision, then they'll see some improvements in ocean life and some lesser power of ocean acidification occurring. And if it was a bad decision, well, then vice versa. Or if it was a neutral decision, they might not see much change at all. But throughout this entire process, the game will adaptively guide them with recommendations about what they're doing well, what they can think about to maybe improve things, and also what is happening along with the summary in the game. And of course, they're also qualitatively and quantitatively getting data and thinking about this entire process thanks to what the game is having them do. The game is having them measure and observe things with each marine group. So this analysis building is going on throughout all of these questions. And finally, as the students get towards the end, they get these higher level decisions about large groups of people asking them what to do. And this large effect that if we all do one kind of thing, that can really have a big impact, especially on ocean health. And like I mentioned, these decisions, especially at this higher level, are focused on things like reducing energy usage and reducing nutrient pollution. And all of these decisions are things that will affect the ocean and ocean acidification wherever students might be at in the country, because as the game mentions, they all live on a watershed that eventually drains in the ocean, and they're all potentially changing the amounts of CO2 they personally put in the atmosphere. So this entire process, again, is designed to really reinforce these positive actions that students can take. So once they do finish this game, they can synthesize this data that they got, both the quantitative data from how these different marine groups have changed through time, but also the qualitative recommendations from the game. And they'll have a chance, ideally, with the educator to talk about in groups and think about what decisions worked well and what decisions maybe didn't work so well. So with this entire evaluation of their entire progress throughout the game, like I mentioned, they can talk about this, but then also have the opportunity to replay the game to increase their levels of learning. So if they maybe didn't do as well as they would have liked, they can replay the game and choose a different character or choose the same character to hopefully improve their score if they want to, or see what happens with different options. And ideally, this reinforcement and building through thinking through different ways and different decisions helps the students really synthesize and evaluate all of this information. So this entire process is packaged into the game, but then as an educator, you can do post-activity discussions. So you can do things like think, pair, share. Students can talk about what worked well in individual pairs or in a group. And if they want to, they can go to NOAA's site for more information. So at the end of the game, it presents a link to go to NOAA's site in a different tab. So they don't even have to close the game. They can go to that site and look at additional real world data and more information about the species and more information from NOAA about how we can all do actions in our own lives to reduce the impacts of ocean acidification and overall just improve our ocean literacy and improve ocean health. And the game also mentions, just like NOAA does on their website, that just the process of educating ourselves about this is really, really valuable, because then we can talk about it with other people and share our knowledge and understanding. And then ideally they can share that with other people as well. So just learning and making ourselves aware as educators, that we can pass that along to students, and hopefully they can have the same effect in their own lives as well. So like I mentioned, there are a suite of educator resources available on the same website that hosts the game. So students will maybe just want to click on that play link on the website, but educators, if you scroll down the page a little bit more, there'll be a whole slew of tiles that show you various things that you might find useful. So for example, there's a whole PDF for lesson plans, and that includes a background primer with links to NOAA, with background information on ocean acidification, and a step-by-step guide for using ocean acidification and the ocean protector game in your classroom. And there's also additional links to NOAA, like I mentioned, along with those post-game suggestions that I just showed in the previous slide. In a different document, there's an example of module integration. So if you were thinking about a marine science module, how could this fit into that? There's also a document that shows how this aligns to national science standards and specific standards, not just in the broad sense. So there's hopefully lots of information and documents that you can use as educators to ideally make your job a lot easier and save you some time in if you want to use this resource. So again, all of these links are available just on the main website. The play the game button is available kind of in the middle of the web, and then you scroll down, and at the bottom, there's that whole set of tiles for all of these educational resources. In addition, though, there's that really valuable link to NOAA resources if you want to do more activities related to ocean health and ocean acidification. And there's also the quantitative Google Sheets. So this sheet has a really detailed page for every single question in the game. So you can see exactly how long students were spending. You can see what decisions they made, how many times they played through the game. There's also a summary sheet that you might find more useful because it's a lot less information, but it shows summary metrics. So things like their final score percent and how many times they played through the game. So the score percent itself is just a summary of all of the questions divided by the number that they got the best answer on. So if they have 100%, that means they answered all of the questions with the best possible option. And again, this is totally anonymous, but at the beginning of the game, the students do enter a 4-digit number. So you as an educator could tell students a certain set of numbers or IDs or things like that they could enter, and that you would have some meaning for when you went to this anonymous data site. Also, again, you can look at timestamps. Commonly, the people using this in their classroom, they're the only class doing it at any given time. But again, this is all available on Google Sheets for free. So depending on how much analytical data you want to look at, you can incorporate and use that as you see fit. So we've talked about the educator resources, we've talked about all of the design and development, things like that, but now we got to the point where we distributed this. So how do we play this? Well, the optimized web browser version is available at outreachgames.org, and I think there's been a link or two in the chat already that shows all of that. If you want to look at the actual code for the game itself, if you're just curious, or you want to download the educator PDFs, then you can go to, this is all on the main splash page of the Ocean Protector website, but you can go to GitHub and see the code there along with the PDFs. And you can also go to Steam if you want to see a downloadable version that is maintained by probably the most popular game hosting site currently in the world. So with this entire process so far, what have we done with student engagement? Well, we've completed 5 guided demonstrations. So that's been about 74 students in middle schools in Indiana. We have 7 more demos planned, and virtual ones are available upon request. So if this is something that you want a guided demonstration for, I'm happy to, as my schedule allows, work with people and do virtual demonstrations as well. And then additional educators have stated they will likely use this in the classroom. They just haven't planned specific concrete scheduled demos yet. So overall, we're really encouraged by and really happy for the feedback so far and usage. And we just hope to continually tell folks about it and to get the word out that this is another tool educators can use to teach things about ocean acidification. And I've just compiled some anonymous feedback that educators have written about here. And overall, it's really nice to see that educators were enjoying the process of having supplementary materials that are already present, and that this module can be incorporated into marine science sections relatively easily. And that, really importantly, that students really had fun playing this on things like Chromebooks, and that it worked well, and that students really enjoy being able to pick their own choices and seeing how the ocean life in this little example scene reacted. So that was really encouraging, and we hope to really incorporate feedback that we get from educators into continuing our work with this into the future. So we have quality of life updates that we've been doing and we hope to continue to do as well. And we are pushing to expand discovery via things like this presentation, along with social media posts and continually running demos. So again, if you're interested in a virtual demo, please email me. I'd be happy to chat and see what we can do for you. So with all of that combined, you're welcome again to try the game here with this QR code or link in the descriptions. Really appreciate everybody being here and taking the time to listen to this presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Alex, for that fantastic presentation. I think we'll go first to the Q&A. So let's check out and see what kinds of questions the audience has for you. There were some comments during your presentation that a couple people had, or one person had a difficulty accessing it through permissions. It said that I tried to go to the game on the web and it said the connection was private and my security won't let me. But we've discovered that as long as you have an updated version of Chrome, that seems to bypass any problem like that. So that's just to alert others to that.
Oh yeah, makes sense.
To that as well. And we have some comments here of, people are in the UK, had no issue accessing the game. The game is great. And one educator at least states that they plan to use it as an introduction to an AP environmental science class. So I know that this was originally developed for middle school target audiences, but certainly it could be, because of its modular and scaffolded design, that I think it could be used for, other ages as well. We have one question here that, let me summarize this. Did you have any concerns about kids, dealing with eco-anxiety, kind of with this type of game? The game approach is great, but wondering if there were any unintended consequences that or feedback that you were getting from the educators that you worked with when developing the game.
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things we definitely wanted to show that we had kind of similar, it wasn't that specific wording that we used, but we had a similar kind of theme in how we were talking about the outcomes and the things of the questions. And ultimately, we really just wanted to focus on positive actions and always kind of affirming to the students that whatever decision or choice they made with the decision or at the end of the game, that the tone of the texts and the decisions, recommendations themselves were always really positive and saying, this is something that was really useful and we can all do, and that there's like a really powerful way that we can change the trajectory of things in the future if we're making these positive actions. And we never really said that like it will be really, really bad if we don't. We never really said anything like that. but we just really focused on, oh, things could be even better if we made these really positive decisions. So yeah, that's a really good question, and something we really wanted to focus on with the kind of feel of the game, was making it very focused on those positive actions, and hopefully that helps answer the question. I'm happy to go into more detail if maybe it didn't.
No, I think that's great. I agree that the main focus on, decisions and solutions and actions people can take leave people with a sense of hope, and that's what our social science supports as well. So thank you for addressing that question. A couple people are asking, how long does it take a student to complete this? Or, could you talk about its modularity a little bit?
Yeah, exactly. So most students I've seen complete it within at least analytically, it's showing things like 40 to 50 minutes about. Of course, the question is always, are they actually reading the text that comes up? And like I mentioned, we do have that breakup of students have to click on multiple different things. They can't just speed click through everything. So it does seem like students are taking the time to read things to a degree that seems reasonable. They're not just speed clicking through everything, because A, they can't, and we can actually see how long they spent on a screen, and it's not super short. But overall, it does seem like students are generally completing this in that time range. But if you wanted to prolong it, you could add discussion after every section of the game. So you could do that introductory section and add discussion and talk about more details if you wanted to, because the game, like I mentioned, it focuses on those positive actions and kind of baseline knowledge, but there's a lot of opportunities that you could build in additional content to getting into deep dives with concepts like chemistry, or really interconnected ecology, or if you really wanted to do things with social science about how fishermen and tourism and environmental studies are all interacting with each other. Those are all really great opportunities if you wanted to inject that in and stretch it out a little bit. But yeah, hopefully that the fact that it's in that time range means it's doable within one session if you didn't want to add extra information as well.
Great, thank you. We have a follow-up question here about that. This is a fantastic tool. This commenter says, are there plans for scaffolding features such as read alouds, etc.?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually have reached out to the people who make the game engine to see if that's an opportunity, because to do read aloud, you have to have the web browser working nicely with the code that the game engine put out, and allow some different permissions and things like that to use the speakers and things. And luckily we have the speaker aspect taken care of, since the game does play audio, but just adding that ability for the game itself to read the text that is showing up as an image right now, but have it shown up as actual text that could be read, is something I'm in discussions with the game engine, because that has been recently talked about with other folks, and I think that's a really great suggestion to add.
That's great. It would increase accessibility, maybe, especially for younger grades or students dealing with learning challenges. So I think
Absolutely.
That's great. We have one question here. Do you have a handout that students can complete as they play for us to, quote, assess what they learned from playing it? So can you talk a little bit more about the evaluation and the handouts and that kind of resource?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So right now, the handouts for students are PDFs that summarize the knowledge and background with infographics and some summary points, along with a sheet that shows the real world species that these game adaptations are based on. At the moment, there's no fill out a worksheet as you go through the game per se. That would be a really good suggestion that as part of this ongoing maintenance plan we can add. And at the end of the game, it does show a summary recommendation. So if you want students to maybe just take a screenshot of that even and send it to you, you can also link that in with the number that they have typed in at the beginning of the game, and look at the quantitative score as well. But I think adding a little worksheet that they can fill out and follow along with it would be a really good idea, and I'll add that to our list for upcoming maintenance.
Great, and I would suggest that any educators here who maybe test this out with their students, if you have ideas of what you want in your handout, or if you develop one, feel free to reach out to Alex to help kind of implement that as well. And Alex, if you could put your email address in the chat for everyone, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Really great questions. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
I'm also seeing how many, I think you alluded to this, but how many teachers or schools did you work with, and were they all in Indiana?
Yeah, so given the original grant planning, all of these were focused in Indiana, but I have since then talked with educators at schools in Michigan and just other contacts I know that aren't necessarily educators, but know people who are in different states as well. But the original testing was in Indiana, yeah, because that's originally where the grant was written for.
And I think that's great to kind of get these inland communities as well. And I think the scaffolding nature of the game is applicable to anyone, whether you're from a coastal community or inland community, who just might not have very much awareness about ocean acidification or even marine life. So I think that's you know, a nice part of this game being very modular and scaffolded. We have another question here. Does it go over the ocean acidification chemistry?
Yeah, so that's a good question. A lot of, when we were originally developing this, a lot of the educators we talked to and through our iterative development, we kind of realized we didn't have enough kind of time to go into the really nitty gritty aspects of carbonate and bicarbonate exchanges and things like that. We do mention carbonate and how it's a building block for lots of marine organisms and how it gets reduced in its availability by increasing CO2 that's getting absorbed into the ocean, but we don't really get into like the chemical equations or things like that. And that was a conscious decision, both because it saved on the time, but also because that allowed educators who wanted to really dive into that they could add that in potentially. But the educator materials do link to resources that you can use that absolutely go into that in detail. So NOAA has great resources on that, and in the lesson plans, there's links to those. Yeah, excellent question.
Great, and I think that, you know, given that this was originally directed towards middle school, you provided those NGSS standards, you know, that this game meets. You know, and certainly, you know, for an, you know, like a high school chemistry class or advanced chemistry class or environmental science class that would want to go into that chemistry, you can supplement that with this. The link that he said to the NOAA resources on our webpage, I put into the chat earlier on, and it's a searchable database so that you could search for curricula, you know, that might provide some of that assisting information for you as well. Any last questions? Okay, I think that's it for the questions that I see here. I'm going to share my screen and just wrap us up here for a bit. So please bear with me for just a second. Share my screen. So thank you again for attending today's webinar. We welcome any feedback, further questions, or suggestions for topics you'd like to learn about in this webinar series. And if you or someone that you know would be a good speaker for this webinar series, please feel free to reach out and contact us. And you can submit input by replying to the follow-up email that you see there, noaa.oceanacidification@noaa.gov. And that you'll be receiving also as a follow-up if you are registered at this webinar. Our next webinar in the series will be Wednesday, December 13th, and we'll be hearing from Valerie Brown from NOAA National Marine Sanctuary in Samoa to talk about education and outreach in American Samoa. So again, I want to thank Alex Zimmerman for his excellent presentation and this fantastic multimedia resource that I think educators across the nation and beyond can use to help promote education, outreach, and awareness and action. So I appreciate that. So thank you again, and this ends the webinar session for today. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you for